Yeah. Thank you. Welcome to this evening's Planning Committee South meeting. I am Councillor Ellis Brown and I shall be chairing this evening's meeting. I shall be supported by the Vice Chair, Councillor Lambert, and the professional officers. Members of the committee have visited the site and have had the opportunity to ask numerous questions of the officers ahead of this meeting. Thank you for attending this evening. May I remind members of the public, this is not a public meeting, but a meeting in which the public are invited. If you have requested to speak, when invited, please keep to your allotted time. But this is not a forum for public to ask questions generally or challenge the points raised during the debate by the members of the committee. Please also refrain from calling out during the debate. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so should you hear the alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exits, and we gather by the bandstand in the centre of Horsham. May I also remind council members and members of the public, please to switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent, and to remember to turn your microphones on before speaking and off when you have done so. Can you hear me okay at the back? Sometimes acoustics is not very good. Okay, I'll shout louder. Thank you. I also remind members, everyone here this evening, that this is being live streamed and you should behave accordingly. When members are voting, please make sure your arm is clearly raised so that we can accurately capture the vote. Therefore, before we proceed, could the officers please introduce themselves, starting with the officers on my right.
Good evening, Adrian Smith, Major Applications Team Leader.
Matthew Porter, Senior Planning Officer.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development and Building Control.
Barbara Childs, Director of Place.
Claire Bryan, Principal Planning Solicitor.
Judy Carboni, Democratic Services, and Liz Fennick, Democratic Service.
Thank you very much. Apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Emma Beard.
Thank you. Declarations of members' interest. Councillor van der Burg.
I have an interest in item 4. I've known the owner of the farm involved in the water neutrality exchange since school, and I also know the chap that's working with the applicant, the land agent. So I would like to say a few words, but I feel I should recluse myself from the meeting.
I would invite you to say a few words. It's not now, but after the public speaking.
Thank you.
And so I will come back to you. If I forget, please raise your arm. Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher.
I just wanted to declare an interest in that the Horsham District Cycling Forum put in a comment on the item 4. I'm a member of the Cycling Forum, but I was not part of the comment that was put in.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Trollope.
In that case, I'm also a member of the same forum as Ruth, so I'd have the same declaration. I was also not at that discussion.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, you're going to tell me, Councillor Croker, sorry.
Yes, as with Councillor Fletcher, I'm a member of the Horsham District Cycle Forum Steering Group, so similar to Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. Anyone here who's not a member of the cycle? Okay, thank you very much. Announcements. None from myself or the Chief Exec. So we move on to agenda item number 4, which is DC 21-2233, land north of Glebe Farm and Kingsbarn Lane, Stenning. Please could the officer present the application to committee?
Good evening, members. So please note that since the agenda was published, there's been further representations received. These raise no new issues not already identified in the committee report. Objection has also been received from Bramber Parish Council for reasons that the water neutrality solution can't be demonstrated. There's inadequate sewerage capacity, inadequate doctors and dentist services, and exacerbation of traffic queuing on the A283 and sewerage dumped at sea. Finally, there's also officer clarification, that the White Bridge financial contribution is to replace the White Bridge and all associated works for its installation only. So, as introduced, this application is for up to 265 dwellings and associated infrastructure. It is an outline application with all matters reserved except for access. The proposal includes open space, an equipped play and community orchard, links and upgrade to the public rights of way, and a new roundabout junction on the Stenning bypass A283 to access for development. As outlined in red on the slide, the site is adjacent to the north and east of the town of Stenning. It's immediately abutting the existing built-up area. And also, future expansion of the town to the south and west is demonstrated on the slide to be limited by the South Downs National Park. So the council's development plan includes a settlement hierarchy that's ranked on the ability and the appropriateness to accommodate growth. And Stenning is ranked as a small town within that hierarchy. So the district needs to provide for a significant number of new homes. And due to its position in the hierarchy, Stenning will be the focus of some of this development. This scheme presents 40% affordable homes, which exceeds local plan requirements, and these will be subject to a local connection policy where qualifying persons and family members can be prioritised. Because it's an outline application, because it's an outline application, the market homes, which are proposed to be arranged as sizes and tenure to meet the local demographic, they'll be fixed at a later reserve matters stage. So just for clarification, what an outline application is, it's looking at the guiding principle of development, and then there'll be subsequent applications for the issues that are reserved. So Horsham District Council has endorsed the application site for the allocation of 265 new homes in the new local plan. And that supports the council's view that the site is well located for access to existing amenities and suitable for new homes. So the site itself is some 14 hectares of paddock grazing. It's contained by boundary vegetation. There's countryside beyond to the north and east. That's of mixed-sized pasture and arable fields. Farther east of that is the River Ada Valley, which is part designated like a wildlife site, and then the South Downs National Park. On the slide, you can see King's Barn Old Cottages identified, which is a grade 2 listed building, and that's opposite the east boundary. And you can see from the pictures and the plan that its set-in significance has already been compromised by the residential development west and south of it. Stenning Conservation Area and St Andrews and St Cuthbert's churches, they're situated west and separated by the Stenning bypass. So on this slide, these are showing the south and east boundaries, which border also properties on Kings Barn Lane and Roman Road. And these are both established residential areas. It also shows a Downs link, which runs along Kings Barn Lane, and that's part of the National Cycle Network. So this slide shows Stenning bypass, which forms the west edge of the site. The public right-of-way existing footpath 2585 to the north boundary, which crosses the A283, and that provides access to countryside and Stenning town. So ecology site surveys have been identified existing and potential biodiversity. That includes nesting birds, commuting and foraging bats, and low populations of slowworm and common lizard. So the application submission provides appropriate mitigation measures for those species. And there's also species-specific enhancements, including wetland creation, which will result in a measurable net gain in biodiversity compared to the existing poor quality grazed fields. So on this slide, the site shows it's sequentially located at the lowest risk of river flooding. Less than 1% of the site is in 1 in 30-year risk of surface water flooding. And this risk is safely mitigated with a sustainable urban drainage strategy, which has been accepted by the local flood authority. The result of this is that it will not mean lots of water suddenly flowing from the site. It also will mean no increase in flood risk elsewhere as a result of the development. There's an existing flow pumping station located north of the site, where there's a suitable point of connection to the sewer network to facilitate the development. So the visual and landscape impacts of the proposal, they've been thoroughly assessed through site context and sensitivities by the National Park Authority and our own council's landscape architect, and neither object. There's elevated distant views of the development from the national park, and the countryside character here is, and in views to be shown in the next slide, forms part of the setting qualities of the national park. So 2 long distance views from higher land in the national park have been identified within the Park Authority for comments. That's viewpoint 11 from Toddington Mount and viewpoint 19 from Stenning Roundhill. So there's an acceptance by officers that there's going to be a degree of landscape and visual harm within the setting of the national park, but that's been demonstrated to be mitigated by on-site measures such as a landscape buffer in setback on the east end of the site, and compensated off-site in landscape recovery measures at the Brooks Nature Reserve, both in furtherance of national park purposes. So from near views to the site, such as the one at the site entrance on the A283 shown, there will be localised visual harm, and this harm will be reduced over time because of the mitigation planting by year 10. Nonetheless, the officers do recognise there will be harm from this view and other near views, both landscape and visual, but they've judged those in the overall planning balance. So what you see on the slide now is the distribution of the land uses across the development. So that's been informed by the site context and the landscape. So because the application is outlined, what we're not looking at or considering is how these areas and uses are populated by particular buildings. It's looking at the land uses. So this is one of the parameter plans which will be the subject for consideration. And you can see that the views from outwards from development to the South Downs and nearby churches have been included. They've used the road network within that to achieve those. And also the dispersal of the residential areas reflects historic field boundaries, peeping hedges and trees, and also sensitivity to the east end of the site, with opportunity for advanced planting for mature screening. The open space also creates foot and cycle journeys within the development. So this drawing here is what I talked about just a second ago in terms of the site being populated and those parcels. So this is for illustrative purposes only, and obviously it only shows how the development could be laid out. So this detail was progressed in reserve matters applications. So there's also 4 proposed character areas which reflect and respond to Stenning and its surroundings, and there's an outline design code that includes open space and landscaping strategy. So in terms of transport, which is obviously highlighted as a lot of concern for the general public in their representations, there's been a detailed transport assessment which shows the proposals integrate with the local road network, and there's a series of highway mitigations where demonstrated to be necessary. So in the view of the statutory local highway authority, the site is evidenced to be safely accessed through this development proposal, and as detailed in the committee report, the development wouldn't have a severe impact on the local highway network. What we see is vehicular, pedestrian and cycle site access through the 3-armed roundabout junction, and also involves formalising the existing A283 footpath crossing. And the view from the Highway Authority is the roundabout will naturally slow down vehicles on the A283 on approach and will allow pedestrians and cyclists to cross using the signal control toucan crossing safely. The way the scheme is devised is that the primary pedestrian and cycle access is viewed to be from Kingsbarn Lane, and here's access will be into Steyning via the overbridge on the A283 via Jarvis Lane, Cripps Lane and Vicarage Road. So we've been quite involved with water neutrality, and we've been able to secure a offsetting proposal, which is sort of three parts. There's on-site mitigation through fixtures and fittings, and then rainwater harvesting, and then water use savings being captured through offsetting on the rural enterprise. And this is a solution that's been endorsed by Natural England. So just to sort of bring everything together with all the issues, obviously, when we come to a conclusion, we have to apply the planning balance, and the council can't demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. We are duty bound to determine the application on the submitted scheme. And the applicant has submitted various mitigations and compensations to address all the material considerations as detailed in the committee report, and thereby limit and reduce harms that have been set against the benefit the scheme brings. And then in overall summary, the submitted scheme is considered to deliver sustainable development when assessed against national policy, and therefore the application is recommended for approval as in the committee report.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite the first of the public speakers, Joanne Norcross, please.
Thank you. For the record, it's Joanna. Thank you. I urge you to reject this planning permission for the following reasons. This is outline permission only. Consequently, everything barring the roundabout on the A283 and Toucan crossing are subject to change, rendering the current proposal pointless and effectively a work of fiction designed solely to ensure that permission is granted. The applicant is not a developer, but rather a land agent. They have produced the outline, which bears little or no relation to their original hotly objected to proposal, solely to ensure planning permission is granted. This is a cynical exercise in manipulation and spin, and not one that you should accede to. The proposal will result in increased flooding of Kingsbarn Lane, as the fields currently absorb huge quantities of rainfall. If built on, this water will then be displaced into a lane which already floods. The Black Sewer, fed by springs and runoff from the Downs, and a network of streams frequently floods. It then drains into the River Ada 400 metres away, which is controlled by a tidal flap. This closes when the river is in flood, and at high tides causing the stream to back up and flood Kingsbarn Lane. Kingsbarn Lane is reduced to a single lane due to parked cars. The development plan relies on this being a safe route for cyclists, and this will not be the case with the increase in both car and cyclist traffic, especially given the inevitable increase in parked cars in Roman Road and the surrounding roads. None of these issues have been adequately addressed or mitigations put in place. Southern Water have already stated that they have insufficient capacity to cope with any additional housing. The local infrastructure can already not cope. The health centre is at full capacity with long wait times to see a GP. Your proposed mitigation of SIL money to improve this is frankly insulting. SIL money will not provide for additional GPs long term, who are already nigh on impossible to recruit anyway. The same applies to the dentists and the secondary school. Steyning does not, despite what your report states, have good transport links. There is one bus an hour to Horsham, which does not coincide with the train times. This inevitably means that any new development will result in significant increased road traffic, as people will have no option other than to drive.
Could I ask that you bring your your comments to conclusion, please.
I've got 3 more lines. Is that all right?
That's fine.
The same is true of the employment opportunities. There are very few. The development is on a greenfield site. There are several brownfield sites in Stenning that are much more suitable for development. Your own planning framework dictates that brownfield sites should be considered first. And finally, and I think as importantly, the vast majority of Stenning residents, as in people who actually live in Stenning, who registered a comment about this proposal, object to it. Again, your own planning framework is quite clear that the views of the local community should be given considerable weight. I urge you all to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Jonathan Bloor, please.
Thank you, Chairman and Councillors, for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Jonathan Bloor. I'm Managing Director of Richborough, the applicant for the proposals before you today. I've been involved in this project from the outset and wanted to share with you why I strongly believe it will result in a quality place for the people of Stenning to live in. In a departure from what's perhaps the normal procedure, I'm not going to spend my allotted time highlighting the individual planning merits and regulatory compliance of the scheme, but rather talk about how the scheme we think is a quality scheme for the community. Your officers have very comprehensively covered in their officers' report before you that they should strongly recommend approval, and that the site has already been proposed for allocation in the emerging local plan. It's clear that there are benefits from the proposals, including 265 new homes, which will range from 1 to 5 bedroom houses of a mix and type intended to suit all parts of society, including downsizers, people trying to get onto the housing ladder for the first time, and notably a large quantum of affordable housing, which will be available for all all members of the community. As officers have mentioned, your council has a local connections criteria, which means that people of Stenning and their family members will have first refusal of these homes, meaning that the impact of development when the buildings are being built, at least there is benefits for the community that the affordable houses can be genuinely allocated to those people. If outline planning permission is granted, it should also be remembered that there will be further public consultation and district council scrutiny to the detail of the final development proposals at the reserve matter stage. This will ensure that the quality of design and place that our outline scheme has sought to embed will be carried forward into the final built scheme. We've genuinely sought to try to bring forward a scheme that's quality, that reconciles the many competing aspects that come with a scheme of this scale. We fully respect the comments of the community and the parish councils, but we strongly believe that the officer's recommendation and the compliance with all technical consultees has been adhered to. I therefore respectfully request that members support the officer's recommendation to permit. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vicky Johnson, you have 5 minutes.
Stenning Parish Council believe that Horsham has not followed its own defined criteria as set out in the Horsham Local Plan 2023-2040 when including the proposed Glebe Farm development. In summary, including a large housing development on Glebe Farm lacks an understanding of the site's disconnectivity from Stenning and the minimal public transport services currently available. Stenning has a limited range of local services that are already overstretched, and a large development on the other side of the bypass, potentially increasing the town's population by 20% without public transport to those limited facilities, will negate the sustainability of the development economically and socially, and damage the environment through increased vehicle traffic through the town and along the A283. We seek explanation as to why this large allocation has been included in the Horsham District Plan, when other new housing is proposed within Stenning that better meets the local sustainability criteria and the local community's needs. 265 houses are well in excess of the figure of 165 homes identified as needed by 2040 in 2 recent housing needs assessments, with existing developments already meeting some of these numbers. With respect to the local plan, Objective 1 prioritises a sense of place, where residents feel part of town life and community. Given its out-of-town location, Glebe Farm is unlikely to achieve a cohesive bond with the rest of the town. Objective 5 stresses the need for community inclusivity through the provision of infrastructure that prioritises walking, cycling and public transport. The proposed Glebe Farm development doesn't meet these aims. It's a 15-minute walk for a fit person from 37 Kingsbarn Lane to the post office or nearest bus stop. And that involves crossing the Cripps Lane, Jarvis Lane junction with poor visibility, where car drivers are negotiating a tight bend. The Planning Committee report, paragraph 611, states that given the proximity of local services which are accessible on foot and the accessibility to public transport links, which would provide access to a range of service in nearby settlements, occupiers of the development would have a genuine choice of transport modes to access local services and employment opportunities. This reads like a work of fiction in our car-dependent society. If any housing development were to occur on the Glebe Farm site, in order to fulfil Horsham's own decarbonisation strategy and local plan sustainability criteria, it would need to be fully accessible by frequent public transport. It's difficult to justify the inclusion of such a population influx into Stenning, as both the local secondary school and medical centre are at capacity in their provision to Stenning and surrounding villages. The local education authority's response to these plans states the secondary school is almost at full capacity already, yet in paragraph 612 of the planning report, you state that the level of expansion is appropriate to the settlement of Stenning. Objective 6 aims to safeguard and enhance the character and built heritage of the towns and villages within the district. There will be no net gain from the proposed Glebe Farm development in terms of heritage value to Stenning. In fact, as a new development, it could be viewed as detracting from the historic nature of the town. Strategic Policy 27 emphasises the importance of catering for an older population, which in Stenning is higher than average across the district, with numbers aged over 65 expected to rise to 30% by 2040. This means it's important to build smaller, downsizing, accessible properties within the town near to facilities, bus routes and medical provision. Glebe Farm is isolated and doesn't meet this growing need for older people within our town. Objective 2 and Strategic Policy 8 aim to reduce carbon emissions and state that developments are required to incorporate green forms of heating without the need to retrofit systems later. This development doesn't demonstrate carbon neutrality. Water. The headroom for the proposed development's water neutrality mitigation is noted as very small in the planning report, paragraph 6161. We cannot see how water neutrality will be achieved even with the mitigations proposed. Southern Water in section 6176 state that the wastewater system cannot cope with this development. We note clarification of the White Bridge financial contribution in the addendum circulated yesterday. So to suggest that replacing an existing bridge is in some way mitigation is in our view wrong and misleading. In summary, this development should not proceed because of the negative sustainability impact on the environment, our community and nearby communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So just to come back on some of those points. You'll have to bear with me as I go to the correct slides just to help reference. So I think from the neighbour speaker, there was comments made about increased conflict with vehicles and users along Kingsbarn Lane. Obviously, as devised, this will be seen as the main access for foot and cycle, but nonetheless, it's not able for cars. So the conflict will be, if anything, existing users along the road, and there has been a road safety audit done with this access and along Kingsbarn Lane, and the Highway Authority is satisfied that it is a safe route that can accommodate the extra foot and cycle traffic without generating a conflict there. In terms of the flood issues, so where you see, can you see the cursor? I'm not sure if you can. Yeah. So where my cursor is, you can see the dark triangle in the centre of the site. This is the area that's identified at surface water flood risk. So at the moment, there isn't any control of surface water runoff, and it can enter into ordinary watercourse unregulated. So in setting out the drainage strategy, there is actually an improvement about controlling discharge into the ordinary watercourse that runs adjacent to the north, and then that also links to Black Sewer and then onto the River Ada. So that will have a mechanism to control the flow at peak storage times. And that is part of a wider strategy about storing water on the site, which I can show you on this plan here. So what you'll see is a string of basins which will hold the water, as well as swales coming down here in the area of surface water flood risk and the wetland area here. So the notion that this development will, in high rainfall events, simply wash out onto the rest of the surrounding land and the ordinary watercourse just doesn't stack up in terms of the demonstration, the evidence that the drainage strategy is there to hold the water back and release it at a controlled rate. There's mention about Southern Water and the sewerage network capacity. So the situation is that Southern Water have identified that there is a capacity issue, but the way that the legislation works is that there's a limitation to how planning can intervene with the other statutory legislation that operates around sewerage through the Water Industry Act. So that obliges Southern Water to connect development to the public sewer. That's an entitlement on the part of the developer. So as a way to try and look to find an opportunity for a discussion around a solution, Southern Water have recommended a condition, and that gives them certain set amount of time before that obligation to connect kicks in, for them to discuss and enter into negotiations with the developer about alternatives. That's as far as it can go in terms of not drawing a conflict with that entitlement under separate legislation. So it's not particularly satisfactory, but that's how the two bits of legislation work. So for the water neutrality, obviously what we've got in front of us is a solution that has been used on other sites and is deemed acceptable. I think there's a recognition from officers in the report that the headroom is quite low in comparison to other schemes, but obviously what we're looking at is only 40% of the units utilising rainwater harvesting, and there is a commitment, if required, to increase that, and therefore that measure alone would be sufficient to cancel out the need for the off-site mitigation. But at the moment, the scheme presented to us is more than adequate because it provides the certainty that we need. In terms of sort of carbon reduction, obviously there's going to be embedded carbon emissions from the construction of the scheme, but the standard of the buildings are looking to try and embed in the physical fabric efficiencies and savings, and there is an energy statement to demonstrate that with the application. And as reserve matters come forward and more detail comes to the design specifics of the buildings, then we can ensure that's carried through and delivered in the scheme. On the point about what I said in the presentation, where although you have this layout, this is not what you're approving. And then there was the comment made by the objector that, well, what are you actually approving? So just going back to the main drawing, this is one of the suite of the parameter plans. So in the conditions, you can see that the outline will be subject to a suite of 6 drawings which secure land use, building heights, blue and green infrastructure. So that's just the parks and the open space and the drainage, the phasing and the open space strategy. So we're not looking at a blank red line. What we've got is a lot more confidence that what has been presented to us and we feel is a beneficial scheme can be carried through and delivered in the reserve matters. There's also a further condition for the design access statement, the outline design code to be required for compliance. So these drawings here you see, these are all within the outline design code. So we're fixing the aspirations that you see here, and we will as officers make sure that that is delivered in the reserve matters and that design quality isn't lost. So it's not a blank red line. What you see is going to be endeavoured to be carried through at a later stage.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we move forward, Councillor Van der Burg, you want to make a statement?
Thank you very much, Chairman, members. Just a couple of things. I'm disappointed not to be able to take part in this. Unfortunately, I'm a bit too close to the guy who is part of the water neutrality statement, or solution, I should say. Before I leave, let's just not forget we need housing around the district, and a lot of communities are having to shoulder their fair share and more. So another 1,000 homes in the local plan in South Warder, where I'm the ward member, 600 homes in Billingshurst, 3,000 homes in the west of Ifield, 2,500 homes in North Horsham. So there has to be a sort of a reasonably fair distribution in the local plan, and I think this is part of that. It's important that we make decisions well, and obviously we do need to listen to residents. It's very, very important that we do. But if residents decided planning, half of the homes we live in wouldn't exist. There has to be planning, there has to be a planning committee, and the planning committee has to look at these things with a view to the development that's required around the place, not just whether or not people want the homes there. I sit on both planning committees, and I don't think I've had one application come forward yet that hasn't had objections. I think I'll probably leave it at that. Good luck with it. I'll hopefully come up with the right decision.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the ward members. Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, I'd just like to say thank you to the officers for their work putting together committee reports, assisting with councillors' questions at all times of day and night, the briefing sessions and conducting the site tour. I'd also like to thank them for the clarity on the Whitebridge Link project. The Link project is wholly separate from the West Sussex County Council infrastructure. It's a superb piece of work that's been put together by the community partnership, who have fully scoped and funded their Whitebridge Link project. I'd like to say that before I started. Thank you. Steyning is very special to its residents. It's a perfect mix of heritage and nature. There was 161 different addresses within Steyning that made representations against the application and 7 in support. Residents have shared their concerns with me on many topics, from fire, concerns with the lithium battery storage, to sewage overload and flooding. Most raised concerns about the overstretched GP and health services. I'd like to pick up on a few of the planning points for discussion. On the number of homes, this application is for the most part an outlined application for up to 265 homes. As per John Milne's email to councillors on the 17th of May, he clearly stated this application must be made, current application has been made outside of the local plan process and must be judged on its own merits. The emerging local plan carries little weight at the moment. I think it therefore important that we understand that if this application was to be improved, it is for up to 265 homes, not at least 265 homes, as per the language in the emerging local plan. I believe in Regulation 18 it was for 50 homes, and the previous iteration of Reg 19 was for 240, so it has seen a significant increase for the residents of Steyning. Many Steyning residents actually favour a number of smaller settlements spread out rather than 265 all in the one area. Most would like to have had able to be in comment on the design, the sustainability, the type of dwellings prior to approving an outline matter. I believe this approach, I understand that this approach is allowed, but really hope that residents and the officers will be able to put in the reserve matters, the importance of the things that are important and according to the neighbourhood plan, such as high quality, thermally efficient materials. The neighbourhood plan states that development should positively contribute towards Steyning's character in terms of scale, mass, height, building materials, etc. I would like the officer's assurance of conditions that the site is to be developed. If the site is to be developed, they would seek measures that reduce the impact of the development on the environment in accordance with the neighbourhood development plan. I'm still concerned about the scale and density. The dwellings per hectare is higher than other parts of Steyning, which brings me on to sort of wanting to mention affordable homes. I'd like to explore if this could be revised up to 45% in accordance with the emerging HDPL policy 29 for greenfields instead of 40%. It would be perceived as a positive move by the developer. The developer is currently stating that they comply with the housing numbers according to the strategic policy HA17 in the emerging plan. So it seems a bit of cherry picking at the moment, picking one plan and not another. The officers have confirmed verbally that in the details of the 106 agreement, this 106 affordable homes will be for particularly laid out for initially for members of Steyning. I'd also like that to be considered to be also for key workers as reported in the neighbourhood development plan. On water neutrality, I do feel that 80 litres per person mains water usage is aspirational. It is a value which is even lower than that in the emerging local plan, which I expressed concerns on at the time. It represents 42% lower than average use compared to the local area. And just because a number's been put into a Part G calculator and is technically correct, it's still theoretical. As confirmed by officers during a briefing, this is lower than any other known development. I therefore don't agree that a precedent has been set that this level of usage, because this level of usage has not been seen before. I therefore feel that additional scrutiny, particularly with that very low headroom, is required. If the developer is sure that they can achieve this, can't we look at it again if it was to go ahead after a particular phase or number of occupancy to make sure that that is actually being achieved? And also the additional rainwater harvesting could then be added as required more in the additional phases, and that's condition 14. I wondered if there was an option to request a centrally controlled rainwater halving mechanism. SDS Water Infrastructure Systems, as per in the committee report, has schemes where the whole group or a number share a single rainwater harvesting management system. This would ensure ongoing use and that maintenance is conducted centrally. On the roundabout, I see that there is a proposal for the dropped curbs at an uncontrolled crossing to a central island, or pedestrians could walk 50 metres further offset from the roundabout to the toucan. I know it's a bit of a behaviours issue, but I am concerned that kids will take the nearer uncontrolled option rather than walking the extra 50 metres. I wondered if officers could confirm if the rails or safety barriers could be used along that side of the road, along to the Toucan, or as you come out of the Prow. Along the existing western site boundary, the speed limit is currently the national speed limit, 60 miles an hour. Could officers clearly clarify for me the speed limit at where you hit the Toucan, and also the speed limits required for a Toucan? I would perhaps like to consider if we could discuss moving that to a 40 miles an hour in that area. Manual for Streets states that settlement expansion is most conducive to walking, where facilities are typically within 800 metres. The site is located about a kilometre away from Stenning Centre. 6.89 of the report states that officers consider the site to be situated within reasonable walking distance for local services and facilities, bus, rail and cycle routes, but there is no rail for more than 5 miles. Bus stops appear to be at least 750-metre walk. I fear this will further encourage driving in Stenning. The NPPF paragraph 105 also prescribes that significant development should be focused on locations which can be or are sustainable. It goes on to say that a bus stop with regular services should be located within 400 metres. I'm concerned that there is no bus stop within a 400-metre vicinity, more like double this. Have extensions to bus routes been considered or discussed? Active travel, expect walking routes to be step-free. After crossing over the A283 from existing Prow to Abbey Road, I note that there will be a sloped footpath which is welcomed. However, upgrades to the existing Prow, footpath 2585, refers to replacement steps. I do not believe that it's impossible to have a ramp design, so please could this be examined again? And finally, I just wanted to mention some conditions. The prior to occupation condition 30 says no more than 75% of dwellings shall be occupied until the leap and the open amenity space are ready for use. I do understand that this is a standard percentage, but I would like to propose that this is reduced to 50 in the condition as the nearest play areas across the A283. As per 684 of the report, environmental health team has reviewed that the layout in the western part of the development does not represent a good acoustic design. The council's environmental team are of the view that acceptable noise levels should be achievable for most of the dwellings through conditions. Can we have a design that is achievable for all dwellings in the condition 14?
Councillor Finnegan, are you about to conclude?
I'm about to conclude. Thank you. I wondered if the condition could be added for testing of hazardous materials in the existing fields. And also, is it possible to add a condition that emergency pedestrian access will not become a second vehicular access point on the Kingsbarn Lane entrance? Thank you.
Yep, I can come back on quite a few of those points. So I think there's obviously a messaging about ensuring materials, types of dwellings are all reflective and responsive to Stenning character. Obviously, what I've shown are just very high level extract watercolour images. We do have a lot more detail in the outline code of design code, which sets out building scales, street relationships, distances between buildings, streets and roads, and all the kind of design principles that you would expect. So that would all be informed as those character areas are populated with building models and building types. So that will all be secured through the reserve matters. You mentioned about the water neutrality, which I think my colleague is going to come back on with the 80 litre. Okay. In terms of the affordable housing, we have got an offer that's in excess current policy. Whilst there is one that's at an early stage that had, and we believe it's sound, that hasn't gone through a stage of examination to be tested and scrutinised by the inspector. So I think there's a risk of setting that as the benchmark, and we should obviously be looking at current policy and accepting and acknowledging that this offer is in excess of that. You're right, there is a reference to be located close to rail trips. To set the context, if further in that section, it's mostly to do with linked trips. So there's acknowledgement that you would have to get the bus, then to get the train, because obviously Steyning doesn't have a train. I would say that whilst you would have to obviously walk a fair distance to the nearest bus stop, it's not insurmountable for most able people to do that. The route is shown to be safe, and with mitigation improvements that are secured in the 106 along Jarvis and Cribbs Lane in the streets as you go into Steyning town, developers agreed to provide, it will be safer still. And also that 1 kilometre, 800 meters is sort of a standard of good practice that's set out in manual for streets for walking and cycle distance. So whilst the bus stop is not on the doorstep, it is within a reasonable distance.
Just quickly before you come on to water neutrality, Councillor Finnegan, I know you raised the point about key workers. What I would say is I have, following previous debates at committee, I have had a discussion with our head of housing. And they're not keen that we add additional stipulations within legal agreements relating to affordable housing over and above the council's allocations policy. We have an effective allocations policy for affordable homes, and the difficulty is if we start adding additional stipulations for individual applications, it has a knock-on impact in terms of how we can allocate housing off the list of those, you know, at the top of the list, or those in need. So I think, you know, I would just caution against that, because we do have an effective allocations policy for affordable housing. So please be mindful of that. Thank you.
So in terms of water neutrality, the submission local plan has a target of 85 litres per person per day. That's been tested through the Crawley local plan that's been through examination. The proposal here is for 80 litres per person per day, based on the building regulations Part G calculator, which, as you well know, members, is endorsed by Natural England as an appropriate methodology for working out future water consumption. So as officers, we are comfortable that that is achievable, as there are fixtures, fittings on the market to meet those standards. In terms of headroom, as the report says, it'll be a minimum 107 homes that would have rainwater systems installed. It's acknowledged that the headroom based on that is tight. However, at reserve matter stage, the housing mix may evolve, and it's through discharging the obligations and the conditions around water neutrality that officers will ensure that there is sufficient headroom, with the opportunity for further rainwater systems to be installed on the homes. As I said, there's 107 homes that will have rainwater systems. There are clearly potentially up to 150 odd other homes on the site where they could be installed. In terms of would the rainwater systems be centrally managed? That's a very good point. And in every case where we have a large scale scheme like this, we request and enforce that the rainwater systems are centrally managed by the estate management company, precisely because individuals will likely not maintain them on their own. So I can give you that comfort, Councillor. In terms of other points raised, you referred to hazardous materials in fields, and I would refer to condition 4, which requires an intrusive site investigation to be carried out before works commence to confirm that any contaminants there can be suitably managed and removed from the site to ensure future safety. In terms of the Kingsbarn Lane entrance, there is a condition requiring its delivery at 37 and 38. We can just for the absolute avoidance of doubt, just clarifying that condition that it shall only be used for emergency vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists only, as is the clear intent from the application. Thank you.
Just going to come back on the condition request for an earlier trigger for the leap. So for everyone's benefit, the leaps in essential parts, so this will be phase 2 of the scheme, where my cursor is. Probably at that point, we're quite close to about 50% build. So,
Thank you. Councillor Marks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'd like to first of all thank the speakers who come from staying this evening and made a very strong case or set their objections to the scheme out very clearly. And I must say I wholeheartedly support everything you've said. I'm able to say that now. Thank goodness. It is a quality scheme, apparently, but it's not yet a scheme. It's an outline scheme. So any talk of quality or benefit to the town is largely fictive, in my opinion. I'm going to go back to the MPPF now, just looking at sort of a broad sense. Paragraph 14 refers to sustainability. I don't see this development as creating any local jobs. It's not providing the right type of housing. The housing need that's identified on page 27 is largely social housing, and this is not providing any social housing at all. Even this 40% that's affordable housing is not affordable. It's 80% of market value, which is, as we all know, is not affordable in the slightest. It does not conserve the environment. I'm dubious about biodiversity net gain, and there's a lot to talk about the black sewer, pollution, black sewer, and the trout spawning grounds, all that kind of stuff, which I totally agree with. Moving on to paragraphs 104 to 109 of the MPPF. It will overburden local roads, it will strain public services, and it fails to meet the sustainable transport requirements of the MPPF. There is no accessible public transport within 800 metres of development, and the cycling routes proposed. As a cycling instructor, I find the cycling routes to be terrifying, and there's no way I would let any of my children ride on those, even though they're quite good cyclists. So I don't see that as being in any way tenable as an active travel plan. There will be unavoidable damage to local habitats biodiversity, so that refers to paragraphs 159 to 169 of the MPPF. So it's in sort of breaking those guidance rules, if you like. And it's not in accordance with the local development plan currently in force either. Finally, it goes to paragraphs 39 to 46 of the MPPF, which stresses the importance of community engagement. Richmond Estate have done nothing in this regard to consult the neighbourhood about people studying about what they actually want. Andrew Griffith, the local MP, was exemplary in this respect. He came to the town. His motives may have been slightly different, but he was in town and he was mobilising, giving voice to public objections, for which I thank him. I think that was an excellent thing to do, and it really brought people out and felt that they could actually speak. And I see everyone here this evening. It's really nice to see. I think the thing that kind of this application turns on seems to be identified housing need. Now, this is in reference to the national need, identified national needs part of the national housing shortage, a crisis. This is not responsive to local requirements. We don't need expensive four-bedroom houses. We need social housing for young people who are able to move out of their houses and go and find a one-bed, two-bed flats in order to start living independently. So that is the sort of global context. So it's in contravention to big chunks of the MPPF. And now going to sort of specific points, which I find a bit slapdash. The active point 1.14 active travel, the route connecting the development to Church Street is correct, but the footpath which joins Jarvis Lane to Church Street is pedestrians only, not for bikes. That seems to have been just overlooked. I don't think there's much detail been paid, not attention being paid to this. We've looked at the footpath already, which Councillor Finnegan has talked about. The west side of the footpath coming up to 803 will be a 1 in 20 slope, which mentions the Disability Discrimination Act. But on the other side of the road, unfortunately, the Act will not be applied and you just get a set of steps. So that's not particularly useful. We've got the Southern Water request for not starting any of the development until they've improved their sewage treatment facilities. That needs to be looked at more closely. The settlement is not within 10-minute walk of any facilities and not in proximity to any existing bus routes. The last thing I'd like to say on this point is 6.115. It's to do with traffic flow. And it's just a use of words. It's a minor thing really, but the firstly, the traffic modelling software is questioned, and secondly, there is a phrase which says it is said to be clear that the junction with the proposed mitigation will be a much improved design of existing arrangements. It is said to be clear. That's not a guarantee that it's clear. It seems that the developer has put suggestions forward, and we're supposed to take their word on trust that things are just going to be fine. I don't have no confidence in that whatsoever. And it leads me to think, what are we doing here in the first place? What is democracy? What is a local district council meant to do? In my mind, a local democracy is application of locally determined rules and regulations to ensure just outcomes in the event of local disputes. It operates according to what the people, the demos, collectively agree after debate to be morally correct. I find this process to be, in many senses, undemocratic. And for that reason, I'll oppose the amendment. Thank you.
I feel like we need to go back to basics, councillors, in terms of what the planning system is here. Obviously, we have housing targets that are set nationally that we need to allocate land for and we need to provide. As you know, at the moment, we don't have a 5-year housing land supply. That leaves us vulnerable to speculative development. And in the absence of a housing land supply, we need to consider whether a development is acceptable or not, and whether the harm is substantial to outweigh that benefit. So, I think you have an incredibly technical report in front of you where you have no technical consultees raising objection, including highways, ecology, landscape, etc. So I think the evidence is within the report itself, and I think if you have concerns, you have to substantiate those with evidence. And I think that's what members need to be mindful of. I'm not sure if my colleagues want to comment on any particular points there.
I was just going to come back with an explanation around the steps. So for everyone's benefit, what's being talked about is where the cursor is on the slide. So this was explored quite heavily because it's regrettable that there will still be steps, but sometimes the land constraints and the levels make it very difficult to achieve that, and it's because for genuine reasons the gradient wouldn't be 1 in 20, so to put a ramp would in itself be dangerous, so they have to keep it as steps. It is a footpath and stays a footpath, but that's the situation. Whilst people endeavour to make improvements and upgrades as much as they can, there will be instances where there are some constraints which mean they can't be delivered.
I was just going to make a comment around housing and jobs on this site. There's no requirement that each application must include a job creating industrial unit or whatever as part of a housing development. This will nevertheless create short-term jobs in terms of construction, which are acknowledged as being of some benefit. In terms of social housing needs, the report sets out that the application is compliant with policy 16 of the HDPF, which sets out the quantum of affordable housing needs that are required in the district, factoring in local needs through the SHMAR strategic housing market assessment as well. Paragraph 1.4 of the report does clearly set out the indicative housing mix that's being proposed as part of this development, which includes a large number of affordable rented homes of all unit sizes as well. So the recommendation of officers is clearly that the housing mix being proposed here is actually suitable for local need as well as district-wide need. Thank you.
I'll come back to you in a moment, councillor Figan. Is there anyone else who wants to make a comment on this? Councillor Circus.
I wonder whether the officers can give us a bit of clarification on the subject of the 5-year land supply. For one thing, I know that we have successfully withstood appeals to inspectors, even though at certain times we didn't have a 5-year land supply. So the idea that if we don't have a 5-year land supply, we can't think of turning down an application seems to me to be incorrect. But as I'm trying to get my head around the significance and the weight to be given to the draft plan. And I understood from what I've been reading that once the plan is lodged with the inspector and the inspector starts to review that plan, the plan then has moderate to substantial weight. That's what I've read. Now, if that's true, surely that has an influence on the point that we don't have a 5-year land supply. Because can't we cross-refer to the fact that we have deposited the draft plan with the inspector, and because we've done that, the plan, which will give us the necessary 5-year land supply, has to be given moderate to substantial weight. So you can see the quandary I'm in as to just how significant legally it is, the suggestion that we are hamstrung because of the absence at this stage of a 5-year land supply.
Thank you, councillor Circus.
Yes, councillor Circus, the position is with the emerging neighbourhood plan and the emerging local plan, the actual examination process has to be underway before the weight to be applied would be more than low to moderate. So the plan has to be submitted, which we've done. It has to be undergoing examination. It can then be attributed moderate to substantial weight, but it's been submitted, but hearings haven't started. So the examination process is not yet underway. Hopefully that clears that up.
Thank you. Any other councillor wants to make a point? Councillor Croker, and I'll come back to you in a short while. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. First point I'd just like to make is to pick up on something councillor Finnegan said, and I don't think was answered in connection with guardrails. Perhaps the officers might like to come back on that one when I've finished. That does raise a somewhat broader question, though, as to whether a T-junction was considered rather than a roundabout. Perhaps would like to come back on that. So they know more of the history than I do. Second point, picking up on something that Councillor van der Berg made earlier, in terms of the growth in population, it is quite interesting that Stenning and indeed Bramber and Upper Beeding have been remarkably static over the last 2 decades, based on the previous census, which I found quite interesting. And the final question for officers is, the Future Homes Standard is progressing through government. Assuming it gets made into law, when would that be likely to apply to these dwellings, or will that just depend on legislation? Thank you.
The future homes progress will depend on the legislation to when, if it takes effect, to reserve matters, because it depends on when the applications come in. Although we have been assured that the reserve matters will come swiftly after the outline if it's approved. In terms of the guardrail, so as the roundabout's currently designed, there's a verge on one side which highways adopt to be safe for if someone falls. So they're not suggesting that there's need for guardrail on design of roundabout as it is. But if, for instance, that verge were to be removed and cycle and pedestrian presence will be closer to the carriageway, there may well be a need for it, but that will be at a later stage of the 278, which is the design stage that's agreed between the Highway Authority and the developer. So there were conversations prior to the application submission with the Highway Authority about the suitability of the junction. The reason why a roundabout proposal was looked at was to help ease the movement of traffic, because obviously a T-junction would cause queuing on the A283, whereas a roundabout eases the passage of vehicles along that road, but also to enter and exit the development.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I refer to paragraphs 6.175, 176, 177. In it, basically, it is said that essentially Southern Water are tankering, how can I put this? Well, undesirable sewage out at the moment, so they're already tankering. And basically, we're looking at adding a certain number of houses to the system, which would increase the burden on the system. And if I read 6.177, which doesn't make sense to me, it actually says that despite additional population, with an increase in volume of solid waste, it's not significant enough to require more routine tankering, but they're already doing routine tankering. So there's a contradiction there in terms of dealing with solid waste, if I can put it that way. Maybe officers could clarify. Thank you.
Yep. What it's referring to is tanker movements. So they're not, Southern Water are saying that there's the existing capacity within the tanker movements as they are. So presumably they're not full up when they do the trips. Point is that Southern Water themselves are saying that, so they know how they're operating.
One hopes so.
Councillor Noel.
Thank you, Chairman. The problem that I have at the moment with this, and I hope that I can be reassured, but I'm not sure I can, is that this is an outline planning application, and it is literally that. We are given an outline of a plot of land on which the developer intends to develop. Now, we're all aware that we need affordable housing. We're all aware of what Steyning residents would like to see there, but we're not given at this point in time any detail on what the developer intends to do. That doesn't only relate to types of housing, but to pick up the point that my colleague Councillor Clark has just made, we have apart from the water neutrality situation, which I'm not going to go into because it's such a narrow bit of headroom, I just cannot believe that it's going to actually work in a few years' time. But more specifically, the sewage situation, Southern Water have admitted that they cannot cope with the present situation in Steyning at the present time. Now, what they're saying, and I'm aware that everything is going to be put back to
to detailed later on, but you're asking us to approve something without these details. And Southern Water are saying that providing we accept tonight their promises, we have got to expect that Southern Water will provide the sewage capacity, not only for Stenning as it is at the moment, but for all these extra proposed houses within 24 months. Now, if they can't do it now, to me, it feels like I'm in a boat that's sinking. I won't say in what, but it's sinking. And the boat makers coming on and say, don't worry, in 24 months, we will provide a boat that doesn't sink. Now, can we really believe all that? Can we really say, right, we will accept an outline plan at this very point without knowing all the details, the type of housing, the mitigation for water, the mitigation for sewage, and everything else that's being promised in the further details? I'm having trouble with that, and perhaps the officers can help me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. I think for everybody's benefit here, we have to understand that an outline planning permission is a lawful type of planning application that an applicant can submit. It is used throughout the whole of England. It is part of the English planning system where you can submit an outline planning application, and the applicant can choose to reserve matters or for us to consider them. And there are a number of matters that they can reserve. They are legitimately allowed to do that. So in this case, they have reserved all matters except access. So that means appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of a later determination. We cannot ask for them as part of this application because that is not the type of application it is. It is an outline planning application. So you need to base your decision on the information before you and recognise that an outline and a reserve matters together make a full planning application. And therefore, when you get the reserve matters, you will have the full details. And therefore, there are some matters you cannot consider at this stage because that is not the type of planning application it is. And also in the planning system, if there is a condition you can add to make the development acceptable, then that is what you should do. And I'll refer to my colleagues because they have had detailed discussions with Southern Water. But as my colleague said earlier, condition 12 does set out that assurance in terms of that. But my colleagues have had some detailed discussions, so I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have had a lot of back and forth with the growth team at Southern Water, but they are the ones who are suggesting the condition. This is their solution to the problem. They feel that the condition enables them an adequate time to explore and investigate if there is an alternative solution, and if not, the developer is entitled to make the connection, and that's how the legislation is. But there have been detailed back and forths on it.
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit further on that, we have asked the question, how does it work in terms of the legislative programme they've got to work under? And they can only enact their investigations once a planning permission is granted. They then have 2 years in which to implement that. In other sites in the district historically, if there has been a significant problem with infrastructure, Southern Water have asked for conditions that limit number of occupations, etc., or specified specific works that need to be carried out, such as they need to implement, as in Southern Water, a new treatment plant. In this case, they haven't asked for that. We specifically asked Southern Water, in terms of conditioning this application, do you want a cap on the number of homes until X, Y, or Z has been carried out? And they said no. The condition they expressly asked for is the one that's set out in the report that allows the applicant to make a request to connect, and therefore it's through that process that Southern Water will identify if there are any issues which require some lagging of occupations, but that will be carried out through the discharge of that condition. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just come back to you, Councillor Knoll, on condition 12, which is a pre-commencement condition, which clearly states no development shall commence unless and until details of proposed means of foul water sewage disposal have been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. So no development can start until that has been provided to the local planning authority. So they have to address that situation before any development commences. Councillor Bailey. I'll come to you later.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a bit about the local plan and the current weighting that it has, currently low to moderate. That may change in the not too distant future. But this parcel of land is within the draft local plan. And so therefore it's kind of logical that this council has in principle approved this area of land as suitable for development. Now, obviously the details come through in the, there's a lot of detail in this report already actually, but the full details come in the reserve stage. But if we've actually approved it in principle, then I would say there has to be very good reasons to then reject it at this stage.
Thank you. I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Knowles. Councillor Knowles, you okay? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. As already discussed, there is a battery energy storage system in a barn 30 metres from the nearest home on the current indicative plan. We need these BESSes, but they are unregulated. No authority is responsible for their inspection. There is no code for their construction, and these batteries can spontaneously ignite, causing explosion. Debris from the Liverpool BESS fire, which was only a 4-container site, and there are a lot more containers than this one, travelled 23 metres. Once water was applied to these containers, the resulting runoff contained hydrofluoric acid, a highly toxic substance which can dissolve concrete and whose fumes can be fatal. The safe design and running tests with the operator. This may be the best ever BESS, or not. It may not have an appropriate sprinkler system or enough water on hand to dampen down a fire. It took 59 hours to put out the fire in Liverpool. Or it might be one built with second-hand batteries that have been faulty or in an accident. Unfortunately, we just don't know. Currently, it's a Wild West situation with planners trying to work out what is needed, and being 30 metres away and not downwind seem to be the main requirements. A prevailing wind, downwind, means that the most common direction of wind, and the wind prediction for Steyning in the next 3 days has wind in every direction except east. West Sussex Fire and Rescue did not comment on it when reviewing this application. The planning application for the BESS, when it was originally installed, stated that the site had been chosen because industrial sites are in general not considered suitable for the location. Proximity to dwellings, conflicting uses and value of land generally preclude their selection. So this site was chosen because it was not in proximity to dwellings. We are being asked to site it next to a housing development. We need more information from West Sussex Fire and Rescue. They are the statutory authority and must advise us on this. As councillors, we're concerned about protecting residents, and I have questions regarding the proximity of the dwellings to this BESS farm and the design and maintenance. So who is authorised to provide that clarification? I would like to see a statement from the Fire and Rescue Service regarding safety and adherence to the National Fire Code, and a written statement from HDC that they are in turn satisfied with all safety requirements. I suggest we defer this application and until we are satisfied that the residents will be safe.
Okay, I'll respond to this matter. Just to give a little bit of context, this battery storage facility was installed in 2017. It's been running for 7 years now within that barn that is contained within effectively sort of shipping containers within that structure. In August 2023, the planning practice guidance, which is akin to policy, National Planning Policy Framework, was updated to include a specific section on battery storage facilities under the renewable energy chapter. And that is in response to concerns that have been raised following a fire in Liverpool in the battery storage facility there back in 2020. According to a House of Commons briefing paper earlier this year, that's the only fire that's occurred within the UK at that point in time. The requirements of the planning practice guidance are twofold. One, when considering battery sites, we are to consult County Fire and Rescue. And two, as determining authority, a planning authority is to consider the National Fire Chief Council's guidance on battery storage installations. To take those in turn, we have in the last few days had extensive back and forth with the County Fire and Rescue Service, and they have been clear that it is not their duty to comment on whether this application is a safe distance to this battery storage facility. Their concern is essentially around the safety of the properties on site in terms of access to fire, fire trucks, etc. They defer to the applicant and the planning authority to be comfortable that this is a safe arrangement. So in terms of going back to the County Fire and Rescue, they are clear that they have nothing further to add to the story here, which is unfortunate, but that is the situation. Now, in terms of what the National Fire Chief's guidance says, and I said this came out in August 2023, it has a section on how close should these battery storage facilities be to other property. And the guidance says a minimum of 25 metres, and as Councillor Knoll said, to be upwind of the prevailing wind. And obviously, as we well know, the prevailing wind, majority of the time, I believe 70%, is from the southwest. And clearly this site is west, or the housing site is west of the battery storage facility. As I say, that's a minimum 25 metres. The industry standard, we understand, is around 30 metres. Based on the indicative master plan, assuming that comes forward as it shows, the distance is 35 metres wall to wall between the nearest dwelling. So in terms of the known standards and guidelines that exist, this application is compliant. From extensive research, I'm not aware that there are any other guidance that applicants need to follow here. Furthermore, the applicants have confirmed themselves that they consider the proximity of their development to the battery storage facility to be safe. So in terms of a deferral, my strong advice is a deferral won't reveal any further information that we already have in front of us today. Therefore, a judgment needs to be made. What I would add as a matter of comfort is that at reserve matter stage for phase 3, which is the newest phase here, if there is a change to national guidance that is more explicit and sets out a minimum distance, that is a material consideration that we can consider in terms of considering the layout of phase 3. So there is a further opportunity to consider if guidance changes. Therefore, as I said, our recommendation is this is a safe distance, and there is, in our view, no further information that would be gleaned from a deferral of this application. Thank you.
Councillor Knoll, you wanted to come back. I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Finnegan. I have forgotten.
Thank you, Chairman. There have been a number of concerns raised this evening about this outline planning application. I'm just wondering if there's a possibility of us being able to defer a decision on this until we get further and better information, or does it have to remain just an outline without any detail that we can make a formal consideration of?
We can't ask for any additional information in terms of the reserve matters because this is an outline application. So I think I need to be clear on what exactly are you seeking additional information on, because there are some elements that will come forward as part of reserve matters, some that you could condition, for instance. So if you're seeking those, then that's not a reasonable reason to defer the application, because they're not going to provide details of the appearance or the layout, because that is not the type of application it is. You have to determine the outline application. So I recognise the concern there, but we've determined lots of outline applications in Horsham. I mean, in fact, this has a lot more detail than many outlines that we've determined, because you've got the parameter plans. We're securing the design and access statement in terms of the character areas and the general and the design code. Yeah. So we are securing we have additional details than we normally do in terms of those matters, which provides us some assurance in terms of how it will be delivered. So I think without knowing exactly what information you feel you need, I can't comment further. Thank you.
I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Finnegan, you've been patiently
No,
waiting.
thank you. Just to come back on some of the points I made earlier, I don't think we heard about the speed at which vehicles can go around the Toucan area at the moment, and if a reductions, further reduction can be considered there. Thank you.
So at the moment, there is no speed reduction along the A283 proposed.
So it's 60 miles an hour up to what point?
Yeah, up to the point of the Toucan and the roundabout, but obviously behaviours have been recognised by the local highway authority that people will slow down on the approach to the roundabout.
Can I just clarify on this point that this has been subject to careful consideration by expert Highways Authority engineers and also to road safety audit as well as part of the consideration here. And it has been deemed safe based on the manual for streets and the correct guidance that based on the current speed limits on the bypass here, this is a safe arrangement because as my colleague said, driver behaviours in approaching a roundabout that is offline, as you can see here, means that drivers will inevitably slow down, seeing traffic lights as well. So therefore, the Highways Authority are confident that this is a safe arrangement at this speed limit. So I appreciate there are sort of concerns here, but it is arguably a betterment. At the moment, there is obviously this right of way that crosses at grade, which as those of you who are on the site visit know, that was quite dangerous to cross. But we managed it in the end. This represents a significant improvement on that situation. Drivers will have long distance to view the traffic lights there. So when anyone's crossing at those traffic lights, they'll have plenty of time to slow down and stop. Thank you.
Can I just add, there is a current traffic regulation order on that stretch of road, I believe, to reduce it to 50. Is it possible to wait until we know that that's going to be achieved?
So in terms of contacts, we've understand recently that completely separately to this application, you're quite right, there's a traffic regulation order about to be consulted on by the County Council to reduce the speed limits along the majority of the Stenning bypass from North Stenning down to the Bramber roundabouts. In terms of waiting for that to take place, if that comes forward, that wait will happen anyway, because works won't start tomorrow if we grant it today. But as I said, importantly, the Highways Authority and the safety engineers consider the speed limit at the moment with this highway arrangement that's being proposed in front of you today to be safe at the speeds as they currently are. But clearly it is comforting to know that there is this TRO being worked on in the background anyway by the County Highways Authority. Thank you.
So it's acceptable at the moment for a Toucan to be on a 60 miles an hour. That's current requirements.
That's the advice we've been received from the highway experts.
It has gone through road safety audit
When was that?
in part of the application.
I just wanted the date if anything had changed. So it's currently still 60 for the Toucan crossing.
No.
Okay, I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor, I think you were first, and then Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. There are a lot of unknowns for me in this, and I appreciate the head of development's explanation that it's an outline development, and that's obviously very clear. But it's very difficult to make a decision when, for me anyway, there are a lot of unknowns. I'll run through them as quickly as possible because I've got quite a few. At least 10% biodiversity in that game. I thought we were aiming for 12. I understand it's before that kind of come in, but still, it would be good to go higher and better. Rainwater harvesting, why not more than 40%? And I'll come to that in a bit. I completely share Councillor Finnegan's concerns about the 60 mile an hour and a Toucan crossing with children crossing there, whatever the highways say. I think that would be a condition that I would want to impose. An HCC conservation officer said that less than substantial harm to the setting of Northfield Cottage would happen, and it would be low or moderate. What does that mean? Is it low or moderate? Another question is, why no allotments when more and more people want to grow their own food? I appreciate there's an orchard, but that doesn't really quite hit the mark. Stenning Parish Council mentions 165 homes needed between now and 2035. So why do we need so many dwellings? And how many homes could be provided by the brownfield sites, which are mentioned by Stenning Parish Council? Because I think that's an important part of the calculation for me. At 6.27, why are we talking about exactly 265 dwellings, where we've got the at least and so on? Does that mean it's going to be exactly 265? In 6.30, there's a mention that 149 households wanting housing and a list of what those are, but nowhere does it actually say what this outline development will actually provide. Does it meet those needs? I just wanted to note the concerning comments from the South Wales National Park Authority about the negative effects within the setting. Why are roof lights not being actually excluded rather than just something to be welcomed? The new roundabout route mentions that there will be removal of low and moderate value trees. How many will there be removed? And where will the trees that will replacing them be planted, and how long will it take for them to be mature, and are there any TPOs on those? The council's own landscape architect's advice is that the judgment, the fabric of the landscape will be higher than negligible, and that it will be permanently damaged, so leading to at least a minor adverse challenge. How can this be measured and assessed in advance, and how can that damage be justified? 6.71, the proposed compensation measures for Brambles Brook will not directly benefit or mitigate the effects within the site. I understand it's nice to do something elsewhere, but that doesn't actually mitigate it. So what will mitigate the identified effects within the site? I do share Councillor Knowles' concerns about leaving so many items to reserve matters. Then going on 6.82, the noise impact assessment, the Councillor Knowles' identification of the concerns around the battery storage are also impacted by the noise, and the council's environmental health team, who are unconvinced that noise from the battery farm will not have a detrimental impact on a residential amenity. And then talking about the road being safe, 40 accidents in 5 years, some of them serious, is actually really concerning. So, and then another final question is, can Southern Water legally put a cap on dwelling numbers? My understanding of the law is that they basically have to supply and connect up whatever the impact. So it's interesting to hear that that was on the list. Also, can we request, I would be veering towards asking to see a full application rather than outline one. And then I've just got a couple more things. Water offsetting 12 miles away won't impact the water that's taken from that area. I understand technically it's, take it away, but that doesn't really hit it for me. And then climate change, 35% carbon reduction emissions and a 10% renewable seems really very, very low in terms of ambition, given that this council has declared a climate and ecological emergency. And then finally, at 6.183, the legal agreement, policy 39 of the HDPF requires new development to meet its infrastructure needs. But then it doesn't actually go on to say whether the infrastructure needs are met. So I have a lot of questions, as you can see. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about how the law is applied with regard to planning applications. At risk of repeating what my colleagues have already said, this is an outline application. You can find what reserve matters are in the law. The Town and Country Planning Development Management Procedure Order has a list of things that developers can retain for later. There's a list, access is actually on the list, although they've chosen to supply details here, but also appearance, landscaping, layout, scale, all of those things. They are it's perfectly legal that they submit details of those at a later point. So I refer you, actually, it might be worth you reading the government planning practice guidance, the one entitled Making an Application. It says, what is an outline planning application? An application for outline planning permission allows for a decision on the general principles of how a site can be developed. Outline planning permission is granted subject to conditions requiring subsequent approval of one or more reserved matters. And I've set out a list of what they are. So a lot of the things that you require, unfortunately, just will not be available until reserve matters come in. And that's the simple fact of it. And that is a perfectly lawful situation.
I can respond to hopefully the majority of those points because there's a few of them there. Starting in order, biodiversity net gain, the statutory requirement for net gain does not apply to this application because it was submitted before the 12th of February this year. The 12% target within our local plan is a limited weight at this stage. It needs to pass through examination, as you're aware. In terms of rainwater harvesting, why not more than 40%? As I said earlier, it is a minimum of 40%, and it's at condition discharge, obligation discharge stage that will secure the right number of homes to have rainwater harvesting to ensure the development is water neutral with sufficient headroom. The question was raised as to why water savings elsewhere in the district are relevant here because it's not taking the same water as from Stenning. But as you're aware, members, every tap in the district takes its water from Horsham, not from the village or town that tap is located within. So the offsetting site takes water from the same source as the houses in this development. In terms of the heritage, less than substantial harm being low/moderate, my understanding is it's somewhere between the two, but the important test of the MPPF is you balance that harm against the public benefits of the development, and the report sets out what those benefits are. In terms of Stenning only needing 165 homes and how many of these may be delivered by brownfield sites, we have a district-wide housing need as well as a local housing need in settlements. And this 265 helps meet the district-wide need as well, as that explains why it's allocated in the draft plan as well. That plan, and indeed our current plan, is not an either or between brownfield sites and greenfield sites, it's both. Our plan includes a significant windfall allowance, and that windfall allowance comes from brownfield sites within settlement boundaries. In terms of the question, is it 265 or less? That is the development description, up to 265 homes. And it'll be the final housing mix at reserve matter stage and layouts that will inform whether it's 265 or 260 or whatever lower than that. In terms of registered needs, the indicative housing mix is set out at paragraph 1.4. It won't meet every single need, but that registered need is preferential choice. It is not absolutely everyone who must be located within Stenning. And what you can see clearly is this will make a significant contribution towards affordable housing needs, both locally and in the district. In terms of noise from the battery farm, our environmental health team are satisfied that can be easily managed through layout changes or indeed improved glazing, insulation, etc. within the properties. So there's no in principle concern there. It's just a matter of detailing. And in terms of that point around Southern Water cap on numbers, the point I was making was that Southern Water, through the discharge condition, may want to just stagger occupations in order to keep alignment with any upgrades that they may require. Thank you.
Sorry, I haven't forgotten Councillor Marks, but Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. This is obviously an application that's got an extremely high level of interest, and there's been a great deal of work done on responding to all the many queries that have happened throughout this application process. I think, as the officers have pointed out, we are a little in danger of getting carried away about concerns about this being an outline application. Yes, it is an outline application. That's absolutely how things work, and that's the situation we have to deal with. We also have to look at the issue of the principle of this site being allocated and the detail of this particular application, and they're slightly different things. In terms of whether or not in principle this site is a suitable site, it's outside our local plan and that really matters. But we are operating under the tilted balance. And as the head of development has explained, that means we have a very high bar we would have to pass before we could say that this site is not a suitable site to be allocated. This application is not a suitable application because we don't have the 5-year land supply. And we have a report from our consultees without objections mainly, basically on the statutory consultees. So this is, sorry, we also looking ahead. As a matter of policy, this council has agreed that this site is an appropriate site for development in the next local plan. And while it does still only have low to moderate weight, it does have weight. And if the decision of this committee were to be looked at by an inspector at appeal, that would definitely be one of the issues that would be being considered. That we have actually, as a matter of policy, looked at this site as being suitable. So has the applicant actually given the benefits and disadvantages that we've heard of that this site has, and all sites have both of them? Has this application got any specific issues that we should cause us to turn it down at this point? And indeed, does it have any issues that we should be adding, as the head of development said, as a condition to help improve the development and make it acceptable to go through? I'd like to pick up on a couple of the points that have been raised by Councillor Finnegan and Councillor Knowles. So firstly, on the vehicular access, in consultations and back and forwards recently, I understand that the Highways Authority and the applicant have been in discussion, and it appears that it is possible, as part of the section 278 or otherwise as part of the detailed design, to widen the access to the pedestrian toucan crossing to a width of 5 metres. And that it would also be possible to have a crossing of the site access road for cycles and pedestrians from the other side of the site access road to get across to where the toucan crossings on. I'd like to ensure that if we need a condition to make that be considered at the design stage, that we add such a condition. And if we don't need a condition, that we can have whatever assurance we need, so that that's taken advantage of. Like Councillor Finnegan, I'm concerned about the 60-mile-an-hour limit. It doesn't comply with the advice in LTN 120, which suggests that for a signalised crossing, you should have a speed of less than 60 miles an hour. So the number that they're putting in there as the top speed limit is 50 miles an hour. So again, I'd like us to take that forward as a committee if we vote in favour of this, to make sure that that we actually are trying to link efforts to secure appropriate speed reduction as part of the detailed design works on the vehicle access. Moving on, like Councillor Nolan, I have been taking an interest in the existing BESS site. Obviously, we as a council have a responsibility, and it's in our HDPF policy and NPPF policy to provide safe developments for our residents, and that's obviously what we want to do. The area of battery electric storage is something that's been changing over recent years. As the officers said, as Councillor Knowles said, there was a fire at Carnegie Road a while ago, which has spurred on some further guidance. However, despite that, we're still in a situation where things are evolving, and unfathomably, BESSes are still not covered by the COMA regulations, which is the Control of Materials Hazardous to Health, given that yeah, they are extremely flammable and give off chemicals in that case. It's the current government guidance is simply that we as the local authority consult the Fire and Rescue Service and consider the NFCC guidance. The Fire and Rescue Service, as we've heard, have been less than forthcoming in their responses to us. The NFCC guidance is something that again is likely to be evolving as time goes on. So what I'd like to suggest is that we do look to try to get more information to assure ourselves of the safety of the development in its context in association with the BESS. Councillor Knowles suggested a deferral. The planning officer suggested that that might not result in a productive outcome, and I understand an alternative we could look at is to require at reserved matters that there is a hazard assessment. No, hang on, I've got the wrong words there, haven't I? Could you help me out on there? It's suddenly gone blank on what it's called. That we should be accompanied by.
Are you sort of thinking about some sort of risk assessment or something?
Yes,
like that?
risk assessment, not hazard assessment. Sorry, I knew I'd said the wrong word there. Yeah, that reserved matters are accompanied by a risk assessment. I think that's got the direct benefit of ensuring that all the bases have been covered and that we know they have. And it's got the indirect benefit that by the time the houses that are to the eastern side of development, which are those that are potentially likely to be affected by this, by the time they're built, there is some chance that there may have been a move on in the regulatory environment. So we'll all have a better guidance in front of us at that point. So those would be my two suggestions. Firstly, on the vehicle access, and secondly, on the risk assessment in relation to the BESS.
I'll take the second point first, and my colleague will comment on the access questions, councillor. As I said in my little speech earlier, I see there being no benefit in deferral because the guidance is known here, and I don't think a deferral will reveal anything more than you already know. As I said, there is some comfort that if regulations change, that this can be captured at reserve matter stage in any case. So your suggestion there of a condition that says, I'm suggesting here perhaps the reserve matters application for, I guess it's phase 3 you're referring to on the eastern side of the site, could be accompanied by risk assessment, addressing any impacts from the battery storage facility. I would suggest that's something we can attach to the planning permission for the avoidance of doubt. Thank you.
I will come to you in a minute, Councillor Dennis. There are a couple. Apologies.
Yeah, so you're right, Councillor. There has been some recent back and forth between the developer, West Sussex as local highway authority, and officers. I think we've sort of discussed around the improvements, so your suggestions and others around pedestrian and cycle routing, and it's how that works with the roundabout design as it is. There has been the note from the Highway Authority that we are looking at a low number of cycle and pedestrian usage of this access, because the concept of the scheme is that the primary access is through Kingsbarn Lane. So they feel that in their view it would never reach the limit, the upper limit of 300 movements to necessitate segregation. However, it doesn't rule it out as a desirable betterment. There's also constraint on the west side of the embankment just by the engineering restrictions because of the gradient to widen that. So I think there needs to be acknowledgement that even if a cyclist as a segregated route was to leave the site, they will have to join a shared surface to get on the west side to get into town. But again, that's a recognised limitation, and there might be opportunities to improve the eastern approach. There's obviously opportunity reserve matters where under condition 33 of the recommendation, there is mention about reserving detail of cycleways and footways. So some of the suggestions you've put towards that discussion could be secured through 33. And also there may be other opportunity in condition 10. The difficulty with the reduction in speed of the A283 is obviously there's a lot of overlap with this emerging traffic regulation order, and there's a danger that we're taking what is traffic regulation responsibilities and absorbing it within planning. So I think there's a danger of linking the necessity of the speed reduction to the development to make it acceptable, because that's not the case. The local highway authority is very strong in their opinion that there is no need for a speed reduction on the A283 to make the scheme acceptable. It might be that there could be wider works associated with the traffic regulation order that might materialise separate to that, so not involving the developer within the logistics of realising what is a separate piece of legislation, but potentially could improve the wider stretch of the A283, for example, along there's an existing crossing at Castle Lane that might well have associated improvements, or along the Downs Link running parallel to the A283, but actually requiring them to implement what is potentially going to be implemented anyway through the traffic regulation order is quite an overlap and a duplication of legislation.
Okay, I have 4 councillors wishing to speak. That's Councillor Marks, Councillor Menton. I'll come to you in a moment. Okay, you're fine. I have Councillor Menton, Councillor Dennis, and then Councillor Knowles. I'm then going to call a halt to the discussion on this. We've had plenty of discussion. We've heard lots of same questions being asked from various people, and I think it's time that we moved on. So I take comments from those 3 councillors, starting with Councillor Matt. Sorry, Councillor Matt.
Thank you, Chairman. Listened to all of this with great interest. I started off in my comments here to try and understand what my colleague here was concerned about, and I will come to that in a moment. Just since then, there's been a couple of other things that have popped up that I'd just like to cover off on. The battery question. Do we know the chemistry of the batteries? Because I'm carrying around a battery here that's got nickel, manganese, cobalt in it. These laptops have all got the same battery, and should we be positioning these 20 meters away from us? Or, as most battery sites are, they're lithium ferrous phosphate batteries that do not catch fire. So I think we need to establish the chemistry that we're talking about here if we are concerned about batteries. My colleague Ruth mentioned a high bar, and forgive me, I do feel, Ruth, that we cannot determine the high bar without the detail. When it comes to a crossing across a, to my mind, major arterial road, the 283, We've already slowed down businesses, put impediments in their way, making transport costs more expensive, which runs into food and other stuff. We should be trying to keep the traffic moving. And have we considered the simple expedient of either an underpass or a bridge to get over that problem? But coming back, as I said earlier, to my colleague here, I wonder if his concern is on an outline, that if this committee grants outline, are the reserved matters then delegated for decision, or do all the reserved matters come back to this committee to be decided? Because if they don't, I can understand the concern that this committee runs the risk of losing control once outline permission has been given. And on the basis of reserved matters coming at a later date, when they come at a later date, will the reserved matters need to conform to any new requirements of planning law? Or does the fact that I'm making an assumption here, I shouldn't, if we give outline permission today, would that put a stake down to have all future matters decided on the planning law as of this date? Perhaps the officers could help me with that.
In terms of the battery chemistry, we don't know the answer to that one. But we've been making a decision based on it being lithium ion, which is the same technology that was involved in the fire in Liverpool, on a precautionary basis, just because that's obviously how we need to operate. We can't take the best base so that it's not going to have a potential fire risk. In terms of the bridge or overpass, the highway design that's up on screen now is being deemed appropriate by the Highways Authority and experts. So in terms of safety, etc., and vehicle speeds, it's deemed appropriate. Clearly, when you're driving on that road with that roundabout, a roundabout is there to enable a smooth path of traffic. And it won't always be the case that there'll be traffic wanting to queuing to get in and out of the development here. So we are comfortable that it won't unduly constrain cars and vehicles using the bypass. In terms of reserved matters, they fall under the same scheme of delegation as other applications. So clearly, if it reaches the threshold of number of representations or member call-in or parish call-in, that is a matter that can return to committee, as you saw last week with the application that landed Downsview, which was a reserved matter application in that instance. Thank you.
Could I just provide a point of information, which is to say that NMC and LFP batteries are both types of lithium battery. So obviously we don't know which or whether it's which type of lithium battery it is. I think we can presume it's likely to be a lithium battery in there. So
Excuse me, sorry.
No, I'm just saying that just
Councillor
the
Fletcher.
information for the officers, that is.
Can I remind members that you should, if you wish to speak, go through the chair by raising your arm and bring it to my attention. If you want to come back, Councillor Fletcher, please raise your arm and do that. But I'm moving to, that's okay, moving to conclude this discussion shortly. I will come, prompted that I should come back to you finally, Councillor Finnegan, as the board member. I will come to, I think Councillor Knowles had their hand first. This I can't remember. Do you know? Okay, apologies, I missed all of you. Councillor Trollope.
I assure you that my response will not be long, and I'm not asking any questions. I've been listening to the debate this evening, and it just comes across strongly to me that there's a lot of objections, but all of the objections are either in the report or answered by the officers or are answered by a condition. And there's an element that our role as on this committee is to act as almost like a jurist. We might not like the decision, we might not want the community, but they're ticking all the boxes. It's legal. The arguments are sound. The application seems like a good one, and also, to be honest, I mean, I went on the site visit, And I think it will be a nice neighborhood. I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. And I live in Billingshurst and I moved into Billingshurst in 2004. And I have seen Billingshurst grow immensely in that time. I wish Billingshurst had only grown by 265 homes, but to be honest with you, Billingshurst is still a very nice village to live in. It's still a very nice place. It hasn't changed the character of the village. And I think we just sort of need to take a deep breath, accept that, you know, even if we don't want it, it's ticks all the boxes and we just have to vote on it and see what happens. I'm sure we'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dennis, sorry.
Yeah, mine was really a point. I wanted a point of clarification on this matter that Councillor Fletcher put forward. And that was around the BESS and the reserve matters. Are we suggesting that the developer could start building, and if legislation came through that changed around battery storage, that we would then stop it? I just try and understand how that reserve matter would work.
My colleague has put up the phasing plan that's secured under condition here. And the approach that Councillor Fletcher was advocating was that when phase 3 comes forward, that would be accompanied by a risk assessment, just to provide the comfort that the homes that come forward in phase 3 are suitably located in respect of the battery storage facility. And that can take into consideration any updated fire guidance that comes forward in the meantime. So it's not necessarily you can't develop in phase 3, but a risk assessment needs to be carried out to ensure that actually it is in broad accordance with best practice as far as is reasonably possible.
Is there a risk then that if the legislation states it needs to be 50 metres away, for example, that actually then they couldn't develop phase 3?
For instance, if it's 50 metres, it'll be a minor dent into phase 3, to be blunt, because it's 35 at the moment from the property.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Chair.
Before you progress, are you proposed, is your proposal going to be different now based on Councillor Fletcher's comments to you, or do you wish to change your new approach to following comments by Councillor Fletcher?
I wanted to come back actually on some comments that the officer made to my comments, if I may. Thank you. As the officer may know, there have been multiple fires around the world. You stated there'd only been one in the UK. At the time of the Liverpool fire, there were only 19 sites in the UK. Not great odds. I'd like to know what alternative safety assurances the officers can offer to the fire and rescue services advice. Would a consultant's report be possible? If we can't find a way around, and I can't be reassured as a councillor that this is going to be a good BESS with adherence to best practice, then I'm minded to vote against this application.
I think we have to recognise, councillors, that the advice that my colleague gave you was from 2023 in terms of the current advice out there on best sites. So it's not 10 years old. It is relatively up to date. We've obviously said if further advice or guidance comes out, we can consider that as part of the reserve matters. And whilst officers don't feel a condition is necessary, given the concern that has been raised here, we do think it's possible that you can add a condition, as Councillor Fletcher put forward, regarding a risk assessment as part of reserve matter stage. So I think we have to be mindful of what guidance there is out there, that there is a possibility to add further assurance through a condition. So I think to refuse something on some not yet out there or non-existent guidance that it's not complying with is a difficult argument to substantiate. So I think there is assurance there that it is acceptable scheme, and further assurance can be added by a condition. So I just think we need to be mindful. If you're refusing it, what guidance are you refusing it against? And that's where I struggle. Thank you.
Okay. One final comment, Councillor Finnegan, do you have any?
Thank you, Chair. We mentioned earlier about the tankering numbers wouldn't increase, that's probably just the volume of the tanks. Do we have a baseline for that to know whether it would increase or not?
We don't have a baseline figure, but we got the reassurance from Southern Water themselves who operate the tankers.
Do you think we'd need to know a baseline to know whether that increased? Is this something up now, Chair? Is this something up? Do you want me to come back and some now?
Apologies, I was just getting some clarity. If you want to continue.
Thank you. I mean, I must say, the things I've raised about affordable housing being consistent with the emerging local plan, it's a no. The checking on the water neutrality after perhaps a phase is a no. There's very little headroom and the lowest ever usage suggested before. It's the bus stops, looking into that, I think was a no. Prior occupation for the LEAP reduction was a no. Acoustic design, I don't think we came back on that. But my main concerns really are about, I think, two things. One, what happens if the numbers increase? Does that just come forward as reserve matters? Because I think the worry is that it's not the 265, it's the 365 or whatever comes further on that.
And again, the application description is up to 265. That is what is being asked for. So that is what we must consider here today. Within the remit of this application, they cannot increase that number. The reserve matters will need to comply with that number.
So it's all on reserve matters. So
yeah, but the reserve matters will have to comply with the description of development of the outline. I hope that provides clarity.
Thank you. And the main thing is still I'm concerned about the speed along the bypass. My understanding it's a lit roundabout, which means it should be at 30 miles per hour. Does that mean a traffic order would have to be put in place to increase it? Perhaps some clarity on that, because it's a lit roundabout. My understanding was it might be a 30-mile-an-hour requirement. Thank you.
Well, I think that'd be dealt with the traffic regulation order that comes in with the speed reduction.
A lit roundabout was 30.
That's not a suggestion by the local highway authority that they need to reduce it, even though it is put forward as a lit roundabout to that speed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to vote on this particular application and to recommendation.
Could I propose that we put in an amendment before we vote to for the risk assessment as previously suggested?
Okay, we'll put a condition in. You can come forward with what that condition might say.
I think yes, have appropriate wording better than I do.
So based on what you said there, councillor, it would look something like this. The reserve matter application for housing development within phase 3 shall be accompanied by a risk assessment to address any safety impacts that may arise from the best facility on Kingsbarn Lane east of the site, and the reasons to ensure safe occupation of the site in accordance with policy 33 of the HDPF.
So thank you very much. So we're that if this is the proposed amendment.
Do I have a seconder on that, please? Yes. Just let's let every councillor know we are voting on this condition separately to the application. So do I have a seconder for this? Okay. All those in favour of this additional condition?
That's unanimous.
Unanimous. I didn't see other momentum. Any against? Any abstentions?
Sorry, 17 for and 1 abstention.
Therefore, the condition is carried. Now move to vote on the application to approve outline planning permission subject to appropriate conditions and subject to the completion of the necessary section 106 agreement within 4 months of the decision of this committee.
Thank you, Chair. Can I propose a recorded vote? Thank you.
All those in favour? All those in favour? Apologies. Okay. There will be, forgive me, some confusion here. There will be a recorded vote on this particular application, which is to approve outline planning permission subject to appropriate conditions and subject to the completion of the necessary 106 agreement within 4 months of the decision of this committee, or such longer period as is agreed by the director of place acting reasonably and properly. So, and with the additional condition that we've just agreed. Okay, do you want to?
Councillor Mark Bainham.
For.
Councillor John Campbell. Councillor Philip Circus.
Against.
Councillor Mike Croker.
For.
Councillor Joy Dennis. Councillor Len Ellis-Brown.
For.
Councillor Victoria Finnegan.
Against.
Councillor Claudia Fisher.
Against.
Councillor Ruth Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Jane Breck. For. Councillor Joanne Knowles.
Against.
Councillor Lynn Lambert.
For.
Councillor Alan Manton. Councillor Nicholas Marks.
Against.
Councillor Roger Noel.
Against.
Councillor Jill Perry. For. Councillor Josh Potts.
Against.
Councillor John Trollope.
For.
Thank you. So we have 8 votes for, 8 votes against, and 2 abstentions.
Yes, having spent some considerable time reading papers on this, asking pertinent questions with the officers, in particular around water neutrality, and have been out to the site, seen the site, and have listened to reasoned debate this evening. I am for this.
Therefore, the application is approved.
It's nice, wasn't it? Surprisingly so.
Sorry, members, there will be a very short break. Do not engage with members of the public, and be back here in by 5, well, let's see, with 5 minutes, please. No, but some might.
Well done.
We get moving, please. Sorry. Okay, we now move to agenda item 5, which concerns a report on the progress of an appeal following refusal of planning permission relating to DC 21-2007, land west of Smock Alley, West Chiltington. Members will note that this report was exempted from publication under provisions of the Local Government Act 1972 on the basis that it contains, firstly, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, and secondly, information in respect to which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. As is evident from the report, which I trust you have all read, discussion of this information in public forum could be prejudicial to the council's position in relation to the appeal. I suggest that the committee moves into exemption session to discuss the report before returning to open session to vote on the recommendation. Accordingly, I move that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and the public be excluded from the meeting for the debate and consideration of this item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act by virtue of paragraph 3, information relating to the financial or business affairs of a particular person, including the authority holding that information, and paragraph 5, information in respect of which a legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. And in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information on the basis that discussing the information in a public forum could be prejudicial to the council's position in relation to the appeal. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. I've started this motion. Therefore, I'd like to continue this and go to the vote. No. Sorry, I didn't hear you properly, Councillor.
Can't it be debated in the normal way?
No.
No.
It's at my discretion. It's my discretion.
Can my learned friend, the lawyer, tell us whether she agrees with that?
I agree that it is at the chair's discretion. And my personal opinion is that we should move to the vote because it's so likely that we will stray into matters that are best left exempt.
But the chairman could use his discretion to allow a debate before we take a vote.
He could. I think it's unwise. I'm going to leave it with the chair. It's his discretion.
It is at my discretion, Councillor Circus, and I've decided that we will go to a vote on this. I have a seconder, and therefore all those in favour of making this exempt from the public.
That's 14-4.
All those against?
Sorry.
Any abstentions?
3 abstentions.
I've made that comment already, that it's my discretion. I've said no because of the reasons the lawyers outlined. Thank you very much. Therefore, this will now take place in closed session. And I ask the members of the public to leave the room, please, including the press. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to the open session. The recommendation as read in session. Do I have a proposer for that recommendation? Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Okay, all those in favour, and this is a recorded vote, so you will, thank you.
Councillor Mark Bainham,
For,
councillor John Campbell,
for,
councillor Wilson,
Against,
for,
against,
for,
Four.
Four.
Or. Or.
Four.
abstain. Against.
Four.
Abstain.
4. 4.
Therefore, the recommendation is carried. Thank you.
Recommendation is carried, yeah.
Moving on, yeah. The urgent business, none from me. So I would like to thank the officers for their comprehensive report, presentations and contributions this evening, as well as those of the committee members and members of the public. Unfortunately, you weren't in here for the moment ago. And at 20:45, I bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Safe journey home.